So when I talk about age-related hearing loss and how it affects the way we hear sounds from around us, so spatial hearing, in my context, is hearing sounds from different angles in a horizontal plane. And I'll explain a bit about temporal processing a bit. So why I study it is because hearing impairment is quite important. It does affect quality of life, particularly for older people. 1 in 3 will have some kind of hearing problem in their older age. So it's often overlooked, but it's quite important. Typically, the way that the conventional way of talking about hearing impairment is hearing loss. So that's the kind of the quietest sound you can hear. You can't hear the quiet sounds anymore. So your kind of threshold for quietest sound you can hear, your absolute threshold, is elevated. It lifts up, you can only hear louder sounds. This is a problem. It's not the main problem for hearing. Actually, the main problem is hearing what are audible sounds, but understanding them in noisy backgrounds. So if you find things just all get muddled together, it's very hard to pick out the talk that you want to. It's more apology a bit. Even if people don't have this kind of loss of their thresholds aren't raised and have this loss of the quiet sounds, they still have problems with age. As they age with hearing back and picking out target speech from background noise. So one of the things we think is one of the mechanisms behind this is a change in the temporal processing of sounds that are, if it's audible, then there's something happening with the way that we encode sound in time that's distorting it. So I'm going to quickly go over a bit about kind of the properties of sound, really, in terms of time domain. So you've got what we call the temporal fine structure, or TFS, and that's these kind of the rapid oscillations from positive and negative amplitude that kind of make up the frequency content of sound. So this looks like it may be all the same frequencies, invertedly kind of constantly going down the same kind of spacing in time, but actually it's got 3 components, and they interact to give you this kind of fluctuating, what's called envelope. And your brain can extract that from the temporal fine structure. And in quiet environments, it can just use the envelope information. You can replace the temporal fine structure, these bits, with just random whatever. And as long as it still follows this, and it was kind of this was kind of represent speech, you would be able to understand the speech. But in noisy environments, the fine structure is really useful because then you can separate out these different sounds. And we think the way that works is in your ear, kind of the sound waves are being separated out into components, and there's a bit of your ear that's kind of going up and down, following that kind of those oscillations and cycles. And these little hair cells open up when the sound wave goes towards a kind of positive amplitude, and they close when they go in a negative amplitude. And this means that the neurons attached to these hair cells will be more likely to fire, much more likely to fire as a positive phase than a negative phase, and the phase of position along this waveform. And this kind of phase locking, as we call it, is the neural mechanism by which we can kind of encode the fine structure, and possibly also the envelope. What's this got to do with how we hear from different angles? Well, if the sound comes to you from your right-hand side, it's going to get to your right ear before your left ear by a very small amount of time, a couple of minutes per second maybe. And that's going to translate into phase difference, with it kind of having an early starting phase in the right ear and the left ear. And we've kind of modelled that over headphones and kind of played a little bit so that that phase between the ears either occurs in the fine structure. So here you've got the red one for the right ear is ever so slightly leading, blue one for the left ear, but they both still follow the same envelope. So that one, oh yeah, temporal fine structure, interval phase difference, which is a bit of a mouthful, but so it's the temporal processing, parts of processing related to happening at a certain angle. And this is this is the envelope. So here they both peak at the same point, they have the same temporal fine structure properties, but their envelope, red one around this envelope is shifted forward compared to the blue one. So previous research has used this to show temporal fine structure sensitivity decreases by middle age and also with hearing loss. However, we have problems that a lot of samples are the older people used for testing often have more hearing loss. So the two things are always kind of confounded. So I wanted to try and separate these things. So I kind of collected a sample of people who didn't have correlated hearing loss and age. So absolute thresholds, they quite a sound they can hear and their age and their kind of relative spread. We're doing a few more guys with less good hearing, but the correlation's low, so I should be able to look for separate effects using partial correlation. And that's what we've got in these boxes up here. So for temporal fine structure, sort of phase difference, there was a correlation with age. So regardless of their hearing loss, in this condition at least, they did get worse as they got older. But did not in this one, interestingly. I'm not sure about that. But the envelope ones here are in stronger correlations. You can see them here. And that's so the envelope IPD. So through the aging is related to predominantly a deficit in processing the envelope of sounds, but also possibly a bit to do with the temporal fine structure. Whereas hearing loss is exclusively related to the structure problems. Just plotted here. Now, we wanted to kind of look for some slightly more direct evidence than behavioural studies, because there's a lot going on in the brain, a bit of a black box. If you're just getting people behavioural responses, you want to know a bit more. So we did some electrophysiology, some electroencephalography. This would be a couple of electrodes essentially, some sounds going into my ear. And for those who don't know what EEG is, so I'm playing sound to my ear, and the individual neurons are kind of firing away, and there's obviously something like 30,000, something like that. And the ones that are kind of related to this particular sound wave, that are tuned to this sound wave, will be measured by the scalp electrodes in terms of their summed activity, everything together will come out like this. And actually that's actually quite closely representative of the original sound. So your response should emulate your original stimulus. And these are our stimulus, which are a bit mad. But so we've got some fast modulation rates. You can see the kind of the difference between these spikes is quite quick, and then some much slower ones. But they've also got a fine structure as well. So we've got a kind of combination of fast modulation rates, slow modulation rates, high frequency temporal fine structure, low frequency temporal fine structure, which is quite a rich amount of information in terms of what people were phased up, how well people's brains were phased up in different aspects of sound. And this plot shows that, and you've got green is where there's quite strong phase locking, so we calculated that the neurons are firing quite precisely at the same point of every cycle of the sound, and that would kind of help them separate out sounds and hear clarity. And you should see these kind of columns here of green at test frequencies. Now these guys, this is with the same people, they've been, well, some of the same people, and they've been sorted by their hearing loss, which is this column here, from good hearing down to quite poor hearing. And what I was trying to see here is some sort of relationship of a general trend of going from green to red somewhere. And that might be happening here, but it's not super clear. Whereas if we order people by their age, certainly at this end, which is the kind of high frequency fine structure, we start to see a trend towards poorer phase locking with the older subjects. The envelope information isn't so clear, it's a bit of a shame, so that's where we expect to see strong correlation with age. relating the two together, but this certainly for age, this is similar to the LPD scores I got. So possibly that's the mechanism that's this phase locking is definitely driving the behavioural measure of how we hear from different angles in terms of the time information. So yeah, I think we've got some good evidence that aging does kind of deteriorate your ability to process sound in terms of time information, which is going to be a problem if you're in environments where that's the information you use to separate out different talkers and listen to you now and ignore them or something. Where the hearing loss, there's something else going on, we think. We've not seen too much yet. So it could be something to do with, there's another element to hearing from different angles, not necessarily just pure phase locking, that's driving this deterioration with hearing loss. I'm going to stop there actually. I don't have anything to say, but yeah, thanks.
Anybody got any questions?
Why do you think that you're not seeing the results you would expect with regard to the envelope?
So it could be down to the fact that the stimuli we're using don't have this interval phase difference in them. They're not like the behavioural ones where the two ears, the kind of information was kind of meaningful. It's like there was something coming from roughly over here. And that's actually how you see with headphones, whereas this is the ones to the right ear, the ones to the left ear, actually are no way related. We wanted to separate them out actually so that we didn't get interactions. We wanted to look at just the lower level kind of mechanisms of phase locking before it got to the bit of got to the part of the brain where it's integrating information from the two ears, where it can get messy. That's actually something I would like to look at later on. There's some guys at UCL do some cool work. They basically have a similar measure of they use these interval phase differences to and then to play to the whilst they record EEG, and they get some pretty interesting results. But could also be that the modulation makes it pretty hard to record. They don't seem to come out in the EEG quite so well. So it could be a methodological thing around just methods. Or hopefully not there.
I have a question more like, because you were thinking at the beginning with like the angle, and this is the F1. So
yeah,
the angle is not like you don't represent what you were thinking, but the angle. So how do you think you could have like someone with an angle? Like,
so what you mean is that in the real world, the sound comes from over here, whereas I'm presenting them over headphones, and it's a similar. It's a similar process, but you're right. The ones over the ears are artificial, and we're using them because they're more easily parameterized. They're easier to break down. But yeah, I mean, we did do some research when I was in Denmark and used it today where we used free field stuff. It is related, but there are differences, and it's important that kind of people do differentiate between them. It's a bit hard to go into detail, I guess, but yeah, what you're talking about, we would refer to as localization of sounds, whereas this is really, you say this is about temporal processing, not necessarily about, I mean, it would be related, but yeah, it is different things.
Just a quick question. So obviously we're just biological side of it, that side. I was wondering what determines how the hair follicles in the ear respond to different sound waves, like the length or width of the hairs, or.
So the thing that the hair cells light on, the vascular membrane, is it's very narrow and quite tight at one end, which gives you a property that picks up the very high frequency stuff, and then as it goes up, you can copy it, which is like a shell, C shape. it becomes broader and slightly looser, so that kind of picks up the kind of local perspective. We're actually getting to travelling waves, so it's kind of as it kind of moves along, it goes up to a peak point and it turns off again. And the hair cells just are responding to that, but they are also controlled by the brain. So there's a two-way street. They are kind of stretched and shortened with electrical input.
So when you get older, do you basically lose the tightness in that membrane, or is that
I don't think it's to do with the tightness in the membrane. We think it's to do with the fact that the neurons attached to the hair cells start to die off, start to droop back. So you've got less neurons attached, so there's just literally less input. There's other things like there's a lot of electrochemical stuff going on, and there's basically like a battery for that in your ear, vascular stratus vascularis, and that loses its electrical charge with time, so you've got less electrical stuff to work with. The potassium here basically starts, so you get less potassium as you get older, so they're less likely to depolarize. So then you're less likely to fight the nerves.
one quick question?
I was just wondering, could some of the findings that you've come across be actually translated towards like future technologies or any type of therapy to try and...
Well, I think the purpose of the research was to look at how we use hearing aids. Hearing aids they're starting to look at having hearing aids linked to it. So you've got one hand each ear and having them linked by Bluetooth. And then you can start doing things with the interoral phase and stuff like that. You start messing around with it. And you can actually sacrifice some properties of sound to amplify others. So this is kind of like looking at what people are hearing us, what do they rely on. If they didn't rely on the interoral phase differences, we just sacrifice them for something better. I guess we've kind of found that maybe they are either yet worse, but we've also found this to say that we probably shouldn't mess with them because a lot of people will still be relying on them. And temporal stuff is kind of hard. You can't just amplify sounds. That's not going to help. It's still going to have this kind of less synchronized neural pattern. So it's I've been thinking about it for a long time. I'm still haven't come with a $1 million answer to